So I had the opportunity, which was a really amazing opportunity, to visit this area in 2017 with Glen, and it was quite simply mind-blowing. If you love the idea of beautiful exotic islands, picture postcard scenery, and cruising and volumes of rare and endemic birds, then simply sit back, relax, and enjoy what is about to unfold. For those of you joining us for the first time and don't know me, my name is Glen Valentine from Rockjumper Birding Tours, and together with Nikki Stewart, I'm Managing Director of Rockjumper Birding Tours Mauritius. We are proud to be your host this evening. Tonight's our fourth installment in our Dream Destinations webinar series and features the remote West Papuan Islands of Indonesia. So initially, when I chatted to Glen about doing a webinar, he was quite keen on featuring Madagascar, another of the world's most interesting destinations, which I thought was a cracking idea. But then he woke up one morning and simply couldn't erase the thought of going even more remote and exotic. From then on, it was remote West Papuan Islands all the way, no looking back. As I said at the time, Madagascar will just have to wait for another day to get its space in the limelight. Please note that due to the large numbers of attendees joining us today, it's highly unlikely that we'll be able to answer all your questions during the presentation. To send your questions through, this can be done via either the chat feature or the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screens. We'll endeavor to answer as many of these as we can at the end of the webinar, as we've done in the past, or via your chat or Q&A box during the webinar itself. So our guest speaker today is one of Rockjumper's most well-known and much-loved guides, Glen Valentine. For those of you who've traveled with us regularly over the past few years, Glen needs little introduction. But first and foremost, however, he is my brother, and I'm super proud to say so. We grew up very closely and spent a lot of time looking for birds and enjoying the outdoors with our parents. We were very adventurous, and we ventured to many different African countries during our school days. Naturally, we managed to rack up a lot of birds, and Glen became the youngest person to have actually seen 850 species in Southern Africa when he was just 19 years old. I stand corrected, but I believe the record still stands today. We've also always had a lot in common. We've enjoyed sports, playing cricket and soccer and tennis together, and on teams, playing guitar, writing and listening to similar genres of music, a love for food, cooking, and wine. Glen and I have had a lot in common, and we've enjoyed a lot together over the years. Glen's been with Rockjumper now for 15 years and started leading tours to Madagascar and Ethiopia when he was just 21 years old, when he was still in university completing his finance degree. He's traveled extensively across the globe and leads tours for Rockjumper worldwide. So I could go on and on about Glen, but let's be honest, nobody really signed up for this webinar to hear me talk tonight. So without further ado, let me hand over to Glen as he opens up a window for you into one of the most exotic and beautiful places on the planet. Glen, over to you.
Wow, Keith, thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. That was fantastic. Lovely to hear you speaking from the heart, and a lot of those views and sentiments are shared from our side for sure. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone out there who's managed to join us today as I take you on a virtual journey through Rockjumper's unique and extremely exotic remote West Papuan Islands cruise. I hope it proves to be a most informative and entertaining presentation, and I'm really excited about sharing this amazing adventure with all of you. As Keith already mentioned, I'm Glen Valentine. I've had the privilege of guiding for Rockjumper full-time since 2006. Some of the most amazing opportunities and adventures of my lifetime for sure have been over the past 14 years, leading tours all over the world. I've also been extremely fortunate to have led the majority of Rockjumper's West Papuan Island cruises over the years. We first offered this incredible, groundbreaking tour in 2016, when no such trip had ever been offered before. The tour has subsequently become one of our most popular tours, both among guests and guides. And just an absolute all-time favorite for myself and all the guides who've managed to get onto the trip. I've had a lot of guests who've done this trip that have rated it their all-time favorite trip ever, having traveled more than 50, 60 times overseas on birding adventures. As far as I'm aware, we're still the only birding tour company that offers this kind of tour. And for many reasons, it has been held as one of our most exciting and exotic tours. It's certainly one of my favorites, and I'm extremely excited to share this virtual journey through the remote Indonesian islands of West Papua and the northern and central Malukus. So heading on to a little bit of geography of the region, you'll see this area over here. Just off, so here's the western tip of New Guinea, the island of New Guinea, which lies just north of Australia. And these islands here, the West Papuan Islands, going through the northern Malukus, or Malukus, right down to the central Malukus. This is our region of focus for this exotic cruise. Just west of here, you'll see the islands of Sulawesi, just north of there, Halmahera, and then the Asian continental mainland, which was part of that continental mainland, the Greater Sundas, and the huge island of Borneo. Just south of here, you've got the Malay Peninsula and Java and Sumatra, and then the Lesser Sundas run just to the south. This is all within the country of Indonesia, which is quite staggering. Indonesia encompasses well over 3,000, even 4,000 islands in total. Some of them obviously quite large, like Sulawesi, whereas there's a lot of tiny ones, including some that we'll visit during the trip, like Merpati and Augusta, not more than about 1 kilometer long and maybe 500 meters wide. Extremely diverse country. Moving down a little bit further, we've enlarged that area of focus in the West Papuan Islands, and you'll see a lot easier where we'll be traveling on this trip. I'm just going to run through the itinerary very quickly, just a brief overview of where we go and what we cover. So starting just here where the little red dot is, that's the town or city. It's really a small city of Sorong on the Flycatcher Peninsula of West Papua. And we spent a couple of days around the lowlands in some beautiful primary lowland forests and mangrove forests, looking for some very special birds, before boarding our ship and then heading out west towards the island of Waigeo, which is this island right here. One of the main focal points of the trip for many reasons, as I'll elaborate on a little bit further into the talk. And then you've got the islands of Salawati and Batanta here and Misul. We won't actually visit these in the trip, but these form part of the Four Kings, along with Waigeo, that lie just off West Papua. From Waigeo, we then visit the tiny islands of Cree, Merpati, and Augusta in the Napier Strait, this area here, before continuing a little bit further southwest to the extremely seldom and ornithologically visited island of Kofiau. Kofiau is still producing some remarkable sightings. We're producing a lot of new birds for the Kofiau list every trip that we do there. And it has some extremely localized endemics that we target. From Kofiau, we sail through some almost uncharted waters all the way to Obi, this island here, where we spend 2 nights, just south of Halmahera. This still has a very much Australasian flair about the birds and avifauna, having birds of paradise, etc. Cuscus, the type of mammal that's indigenous to the region and mostly an Australian species, the type of marsupial. From Obi, we then head down south to Seram, this large island, and this will be one of the main focal points of the main tour, harboring a staggering number of endemics. Continuing a little bit further west, we then spend a morning on this tiny island of Buano before sailing around here and ending in Ambon, which is the main hub for the region, where you fly in and out of. That's where the main tour, the actual cruise itself ends. And then those wishing to carry on the Buru extension will then start by taking a flight, now a little domestic flight, onto the island of Buru, and then spending several nights, about 5 nights on Buru, and then before heading back to Ambon, where the entire tour will close. All right, as mentioned before, many reasons to consider this trip as one of your bucket list trips. It really is in my top 5 trips of all time. I think all the guides who've ever done it could say the same. The highlights are absolutely staggering. You've got 74 Indonesian endemics of a total bird list of about 350 species for the region, of which we usually encounter about 260 of those. 100 New Guinea endemics. By starting on the island of New Guinea, you get to grips with a staggering number of New Guinea endemics, some of them overlapping with the actual Papua New Guinea, and that's a very popular tour of ours too, but with several really special localized West Papuan endemics as well. 10 birds of paradise are possible on a trip, of which we usually see 8 species. The further 2 are quite scarce, but we have recorded all 10 before on trips. 7 owls, which is quite a large number of owls. Almost every island in the region has an endemic owl. And New Guinea is famous for its kingfishers, and this trip is no exception. You've got a staggering 18 species of kingfishers. Some of the most spectacular kingfishers on Earth occur in this region, of which 3 are paradise kingfishers, 27 parrots, it's unreal, and 5 species of pitta, which is my favorite bird family in the world. And yeah, 11 islands visited in total, from the tiny little almost offshore reef islands of Mapati and Augusta to the large islands of Seram. Yeah, one of my favorite reasons for traveling in this part of the world, it's just amazing to bird in areas that are almost completely ornithologically unknown and have virtually been visited by very few birders. You're seeing a lot of birds that probably fewer than 100 birders have ever seen. And yeah, experiencing and sailing through some beautiful uncharted seas, crystal clear waters, some of the most pristine coral reefs on Earth that we'll actually manage to do some snorkeling around as well. And then, yeah, what more could be better than being based on a beautiful, almost luxurious vessel with some amazing food for 12 consecutive nights, not having to unpack or worry about getting to the next site, next destination, arriving late, all that kind of stuff. Settle in, 12 nights, you've got your own room, own shower all the time. You can really unpack and settle in and enjoy the ship. All right, so folks, just starting in the lowlands of Sarong. That's where we start the trip. That big blue circle is up there. That's an area we'll spend about 3 nights birding some lowland and mangrove forest to kick off proceedings. All right, we'd just like to run a quick poll before I continue here. And the poll is, of the following list of cruise destinations, which is the highest on your list once we can travel safely and cruise again? Your options are Galapagos, Spitsbergen, Antarctica, Indonesia Remote West Papuan Islands, or another Indonesian cruise that we offer into the Banda Sea, or the Western Pacific Odyssey.
Give me a few seconds, Glenn. I'll get those numbers off to you.
Thanks very much, Nikki. All right, here we go. Exciting stuff. Reading out the stats that have just come in, we've got 12% for Galapagos, 4% for the Spitsbergen, 17% Antarctica, and wow, a staggering 58% for this actual trip and destination, the Remote West Papuan Islands cruise, or Banda Sea, and then 9% for Western Pacific Odyssey. All right, very interesting. Thanks, guys. Okay, continuing. So birding around the lowlands of Sarong can be some of the most rewarding birding I've ever done anywhere in Australasia. The sheer extent of a primary lowland forest there is quite staggering, and the number of quality birds is exceptional. Starting off here, we'll get to grips with a few species that also overlap with Australia and the whole island of New Guinea. So some familiar species that we'll encounter, things like Pacific buzzer, here in a flight shot, and migratory channel-bill cuckoos come to winter in that part of the world. We'll likely see them. It's a huge cuckoo that often fly over in big flocks, very unique bird. The spectacular and extremely sought after palm cockatoo is another big highlight, and whereas it's really rare and localized in northeastern Australia, it's pleasantly common in the lowlands of New Guinea And it's really just due to the vastness and extensiveness of the forest there, and the quality of the forest. Blythe's hornbills, the picture doesn't really do it justice, but this hornbill is almost a meter tall. And they're extremely common. They fly around all over the place. We see them on virtually every island we visit. A pleasantly common and familiar sighting, but it's an absolutely spectacular bird. One of my absolute favorites, the Eclectus Parrot. Here, a pair side by side. You've got the female there on the left, the red and blue one, arguably more pretty than the male that's all solid green with the bright red bill. But yeah, a loud, raucous, noisy species that's really common throughout the trip. Again, in comparison to northeastern Australia, where it's really quite localized and scarce. Red-cheeked parrot, another scarce Australian species, is virtually abundant on the trip. You see massive flocks flying over constantly. It's a constant feature of the trip with their unique high-pitched calls. And yeah, what can we say? What a gaudy bird, but pleasantly common to the black-capped lory. Quite a regular sighting in the early morning and late afternoon as they come flying over the forest in fairly large flocks. One of the most special species that we might find in the West Papua that'll be a big target there is the black lory. That's literally endemic to the Volkel Peninsula. And although we usually see them really well, sometimes perched, but usually in flight, they don't usually sit for very long, so we don't have any decent photographs, and I haven't added that to the photographic list here, but black lory is a big target for West Papua and the Volkel. It's parrot paradise, as mentioned already, 27 species possible on the trip, ranging from Eclectus to, this is a type of fig parrot that's pretty typical of New Guinea area. This is the orange-breasted fig parrot, and we also usually see large fig parrots as well as double-eyed fig parrot during our times in the lowlands there. This tiny yellow-capped pygmy parrot, again, you can't really gauge by the actual photograph, but it's no larger than a white-eye, minuscule parrot that you usually just see flying overhead, but every now and then we get really lucky and get a perch view. I took this photograph last year, August, in the mangroves. They were actually nesting there, and we got really lucky and managed to get some very good close views of this tiny parrot. Pygmy parrots are just so cute and a real favorite throughout New Guinea. Pygmy parrots are a feature. They're one of my favorite families, and I know that speaks for most of our guests. This is the Moustache Tree swift, the largest of the tree swifts, of a family where there's 4 representatives, and a very common species. Even though they're so spectacular, you see them really well, often perched up walking insects at the forest edge. A real stunner, one of my favorite birds, the golden cuckoo shrike, is a bit of a flock species. Now we're getting into the real solid, proper core New Guinea endemics, the real mouth-watering things that most people are drawn to the island by, as well as golden monarch, an absolute ripper of a bird. You've got a couple more monarchs in the lowland forest here. This is the frilled monarch, with the male having the brilliant blue caruncle and being all black and white, while the female is, again, arguably more pretty. She's brilliant rufous in color, but her blue caruncle is not quite as pronounced as the male, but still a stunning bird, and also fairly common in the lowland forests. A little bit rarer and certainly a lot tougher to see and photograph is this Papuan babbler. It belongs to a family of birds that's endemic to Australia, or Australasia, called the Australasian babblers. There's 4 species on Australia and then 1 endemic to New Guinea, and we hope to find it in the lowlands. Sitting up at the forest edge, you've got lowland peltops, which is actually a type of butcher bird. And everyone loves fairy wrens. Most fairy wrens occur in Australia, but this is the emperor fairy wren, one of the most stunning species. It's a forest edge species endemic to New Guinea, and we have an excellent chance of seeing them in the lowlands. A rare, really rare species that is very seldom seen, never mind photographed. This is streak-headed manakin, an almost impossible bird to find anywhere in its range in New Guinea, but we regularly find the species in the lowlands of West Papua. It's by far and away the best area on earth to see streak-headed manakin. A huge feature of the trip, I didn't mention it in the families that are so well represented, But doves and pigeons probably have more representation in New Guinea than any other family, and this trip is no exception. A staggering number of fruit doves that are really stunning. You got lots of imperial pigeons too, and cuckoo doves with their long tails. This is the superb fruit dove that also occurs up in or down in Australia and right across New Guinea, but a really spectacular species. Orange-fronted fruit doves are a lot more localized and special. We'll see them in the mangroves when we bird the mangrove forests. And the Wampu fruit dove with its really bizarre onomatopoeic name describing its call. It says like a woo type call. It's a beautiful call that resonates right through the forest, pleasantly common by voice, but quite tricky to see. The imperial pigeons, as mentioned, are really well represented. This is Zoe's imperial pigeon, a really handsome species. And then Sultan's cuckoo dove, which has recently been split from brown cuckoo dove, quite common and obtrusive in the forests right throughout the trip. And a bit further west, we'll encounter another species of cuckoo dove, and the Amboina cuckoo dove that's recently been split as well. It's a really localized species on Seram and Buru. And then, well, what can we say? Birds of paradise. West Papua is really well represented. This trip gets stuck into several species of bird of paradise, some of which are endemic to the West Papuan region. This is the king bird of paradise, one that we're probably going to see extremely well. We've never missed the species, and we really do know how to get crippling views as we get just into the forest at the display sites. We sometimes get lucky and see them displaying, but we'll no doubt get good scope views of the male as it sits motionless up in the canopy, often calling for the females to come in. This is a bird that's keen to display, but not quite displaying yet. It's got these beautiful, you can't really see them, but they're these streamers here that end in a brilliant iridescent emerald green, almost racket or sphere. One of my favorite birds of paradise, and yeah, West Papua is a great area to see the species. A lot of the birds of paradise that we will see.
Sorry, Glenn, I just got a comment come in, if you wouldn't mind saying the names a little bit more clearer and slower so that they can hear.
Sure, okay. All right, thanks, Nikki, will do. All right, so as far as birds of paradise are concerned, we get to see a lot of different species. Not all of them are that photographable. Some of them we'll only see females and juveniles, but a good number we'll see some stunning males. Moving on to pitters, this is the Papuan pitter that's recently been split from the red-bellied pitter. And if you're very lucky in the mangroves, we might see barred rail. This is a really unique photograph of one on the island of Sulawesi, where they're a lot more common and easy to see, but we do have a good chance of them in the mangroves around Sarong. Onto kingfishers that I mentioned before are extremely well represented. This is the yellow-billed kingfisher, which also does occur down south in Australia, but yeah, pleasantly common in the lowlands of West Papua. And then a New Guinea endemic, a huge kookaburra, not quite as big as the kookaburras further south in Australia, like the blue-winged. This is the rufous-bellied kookaburra that's extremely vocal and usually poses extremely well for good photographic opportunities and views. In complete contrast, one of the rarest kingfishers on Earth that was only recently almost rediscovered around the lowlands of Sarong. This is the blue-black kingfisher, a male represented here, and it's one of the big targets and specialties around the lowlands of Sarong. We'll look for them in the mangroves, but we might also see them in the lowland forest surrounding town. This is a very rarely seen and photographed bird. This represents one of the only existing photographs for the species. But as mentioned, this tour is the tour to see this gorgeous kingfisher. And then even rarer and more localized, and yeah, probably in my top 5 most favorite birds of the entire trip, the red-breasted paradise kingfisher, that we have a good chance around Sarong. We've missed it our first trip in 2016, but we haven't ever missed it ever again since. We now really know where to look for the species and how to track it down. It's red-breasted paradise kingfisher. You can just see its It's paradise rackettail streamers coming through there on this perch bird. And then sadly, but yeah, all good things must end, so the next great trip must start. So we end our time on the mainland of West Papua and board our beautiful ship to set sail on the actual cruise itself, leaving Sarong and setting sail to Waigeo. So this is the first ship that we used to use, the Seahorse, a beautiful ship, really comfortable, but cabins were a little bit pokey and it wasn't quite enough space on board. We had a great few seasons in the Seahorse, but they then brought in a new ship that we used a few years ago by the name of the Mola Mola that was even more impressive and more spacious, more luxurious, even more enjoyable. Better, bigger kitchen, and we just had the most amazing time on the Mola Mola on the last trip that I did there. Subsequently, the same company is actually building a brand new ship that we'll be using for our future seasons, where we're going to use it this year on our 2 trips that were already sold out, but that we've had it postponed due to the COVID epidemic. We don't actually have photographs of the new ship or the cabins themselves. The ship is still being built, but it promises to be even better, faster, and more comfortable than any of the ships that we've previously used. So I'm really excited about that. I mean, you could almost not get better than the Seahorse and the Mola Mola as far as liveaboard cruise ships for birding trips are concerned. But this new ship promises to be just out of this world. So a lot of folks ask about a typical day during the cruise and what makes it up. And you really get into a routine on this trip, which is really enjoyable. And one of the things that guests really love about this trip, we get to obviously spend 12 nights aboard the ship. And many days are very similar in their structure. And so you get into a nice routine that people enjoy. It's a routine that really works well, even though the early morning starts can be a bit of a challenge, but you do get used to them, and there is a lot of downtime too. So your typical day, whether you're sailing or whether you're going on board various islands, is an early 3 to 4 a.m. start. The guys make an incredible breakfast on board the ship, a huge variety, delicious food, right early in the morning, so you can get energized for the day ahead. We then board our Zodiacs that are really comfortable. Then you just sail, or you zoom out about 5 minutes to the shore of the islands, and from there spend usually around 5 hours on shore birding, either from the vehicles or just gradually, slowly down roads and gravel tracks. Very easy birding usually at the forest edge. We do very few trails on this trip. We're birding such a beautiful and extensive and almost pristine forest that you don't need to get into the forest interior to see all the species that we want to see on the trip. And then when the day starts heating up around 10, 11 in the morning, we return to the Zodiacs, head back to the ship, and then you've got your rooms to use to freshen up, have a nice shower, get rid of the stickiness of the morning, and yeah, enjoy a scrumptious lunch before taking a little break, either on the ship. That's when we usually either start setting sail to the next island, so you can head out on deck and do some really good sea watching, or yeah, or just have some downtime and have a little nap in the heat of the day. And then either sailing right through the afternoon and then evening to the next island, or heading back to the island that we based off, if we're there for more than one night, to spend from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon onwards through the better part of the afternoon into some optional owling that will be offered most nights on most of the islands. That's a photograph of the Seahorse anchored off Serra, and that's your typical scenery and setting where the ship will be anchored in a very calm bay, so you get to sleep really well, and perfectly poised to head onto the island the next morning, nice and early. It's the austral summer when we do the trip, which means mornings start really early. You know, sunrise is about 5 o'clock, so early starts are because we need to get onto the islands at and around dawn to maximize the best time for birding on the islands themselves. Those are the Zodiacs we use. We use 2 of them to cater for us heading onto the islands. They're not covered or anything, but we don't spend much time on them. And they're very safe, very secure. There's life jackets on board. The skippers of the boats are extremely knowledgeable and excellent and trustworthy. And yeah, it really does work very well. They're extremely fast, so they get from the ship to the shore really quickly. So you can maximize your time onshore birding. That's your typical birding setting. This is walking down the road in Seram. So you've got the group there, and at your typical winding road, either paved or sometimes a gravel logging track, usually flat walking or slowly, gradually downhill at the forest edge. It really couldn't be more easy birding and rewarding birding than on this trip. Even though it's a tar road, you'll see there's usually very little traffic on these island roads. So that's not an issue at all that we have to deal with. Then moving, so setting sail from Sarong, heading over to Waigeo, we cross through some beautiful waters and do some nice sea watching. We will look for things like black-naped tern, a lot of other species of tern. We might see some of the Jaegers coming down, bulwers petrel, these lesser frigate birds. That's a male lesser frigate bird. They're quite common throughout the trip, and maybe if we're lucky, the great frigate bird or even Christmas Island frigate bird has been recorded in the waters before. Several species of booby possible. We've even seen Abbott's booby along the route. That's a juvenile lesser frigate bird. Before heading on to probably the main event of the whole trip, I think a lot of folks sign up onto this trip for this bird alone. Never mind all the other incredible endemics. The showstopper bird of the trip probably is Wilson's bird of paradise. In my opinion, probably the most spectacular bird on earth. My most incredible birding experiences ever have been watching displaying Wilson's bird of paradise in the hides on Waigeo Island. It really is an otherworldly experience and one that's almost unbeatable anywhere on Earth. So generally what happens is we run through the usual routine, early breakfast, head onto the Zodiacs, get on shore nice and early, just before dawn while it's still really cool and actually dark just before dawn. Drive about 15 minutes in the vehicles along a logging track to where they've got a number of hides set up where the birds come in at the time of year that we visit to display in front of the hides, or at least visit to clean around their display site and call for the females to come in. This is a displaying bird of Wilson's bird of paradise at one of the lek sites from the hides that we view on the West Papuan Island cruise. I took this photograph about 3 years ago. There's a photograph of Wilson's birds of paradise displaying for a female. You can see the female up here, all curious, looking down on the displaying males. Some are adult males like this one, some are sub-adult males. They all come in and do their thing, and it's just an absolutely mind-blowing experience. Probably the most amazing birding experience that most folks will ever encounter. There's the female Wilson's bird of paradise. She's still pretty. I mean, she's got that bright blue bald crown there, but yeah, certainly a lot drabber than the males. We'll certainly see both sexes. And you usually get around 3 hours continual viewing of Wilson's bird of paradise. We get into the hides around 6 a.m. and yeah, have almost permanent viewing till about 9 o'clock in the morning before the birds head off and feed. And then we just carry on and do some nice general birding along the logging road. One of the mornings will definitely be dedicated to this species, the red bird of paradise. That's, gosh, just as spectacular. They lek in fairly large groups where the males go up into the canopy and call for the females to attract them. And they do this crazy display where they hang upside down and then flare their flank plumes, calling really loudly. And they've got these spectacular plumes that come right out here. And they've also got these flank plumes that they flare right out and then flap over their backs, over their heads while they're hanging upside down. And then what they do is they jump up and down on the branch in a testosterone-fueled display like nothing you'll ever see on any birding trip. Another real target species, the Western crown pigeon. We'll be lucky to see the species, but we have seen them several times on the trip. They're really shy, and they are unfortunately reducing in numbers due to hunting pressure. But yeah, decent chance of Western crown pigeon, one of 4 species of crown pigeon, all endemic to New Guinea. Brown-headed crow is not much of a looker, but it's exceedingly localized and one of Waigeo's really special localized endemics. Then you've got an amazing suite of fruit doves. This is the claret-breasted fruit dove. And moving on to beautiful fruit dove, which is just equally stunning, all fairly common in the forest on Waigeo. Dwarf fruit dove is a minuscule fruit dove, not much more than about 20 centimeters in size, but Waigeo is an excellent place to see dwarf fruit dove. If we're extremely lucky, we might even see New Guinea bronzewing, which is a really shy forest interior species, and pleasantly common, but not always easy to see. This is the common paradise kingfisher with its spectacular tail streamers. We'll hear them at dawn right around the hides when we're sitting waiting for Wilson's bird of paradise to come in. They'll be calling and flying around all around us, and we usually get to achieve some excellent views of them. Much smaller and a lot shyer in the forest interior, we've got Papuan dwarf kingfisher, and this crepuscular hook-billed kingfisher that only calls and feeds around dawn and dusk. Very unique species that's quite tricky to see, but Waigeo usually produces some decent sightings of them. This is New Guinea's smallest bird, only 10 centimeters in size. This is the Pygmy longbill. And this is a very rare photograph of one coming right down to eye level. They're usually way up in the canopy, belonging to the endemic family of berrypeckers and longbills that are endemic to New Guinea. And then we'll do a little bit of night birding, usually before we head into the hides, just around dawn, or we might even get lucky and find frogmouths on the day roost. This is the marbled frogmouth, and as well as Papuan frogmouth. They're both very gettable on Waigeo. And one afternoon we'll head onto the Zodiacs and head around the Raja Islands. It's an area of beautiful, really picturesque limestone islands that are just south of Waigeo, and we'll meander through the islands, the narrow waterways on our Zodiacs, enjoying a beautiful afternoon, incredible scenery, and often manta rays right around the boat, as well as some really special endemic birds sitting up in the late afternoon. These are the islands here, really picturesque, pristine. They've never been touched, logged. There's no trapping on these islands at all, so birds are really tame and sit up really nicely. This is just some of the scenery around the Raja Islands. One of the most beautiful places I've ever visited. And then combined with some of the endemics that show up, like Spice Imperial Pigeon and Beach Kingfisher, as well as great-billed heron. Quite a widespread bird, but nowhere common or easy to see. One of the largest herons on Earth. And flocks of metallic starlings in the late afternoon will be sitting up for us to enjoy, along with the Malukus starling, which is a lot scarcer. And has a much shorter tail with a black eye, but we should get good views of both species during the afternoon outings. And then around dusk, we'll position ourselves at one of these tiny little limestone islands and wait for hundreds, literally hundreds of great-billed parrots to fly in and roost. It's one of the only sites in the world where we see this species. It's really rare and scarce, and we don't have any photographs of it. But it's a beautiful big green parrot with a massive red bill, similar to the black lord parrot on Buru. And to sit at dusk as the sun's setting with the most incredible backdrop of these islands and watching hundreds of these rare and endangered parrots flying into roost is one of the most remarkable experiences you can ever have. All right, so leaving Waigeo and heading further south, and we're going to then touch onto a couple of tiny offshore islands of Cree, Mapati, and Augusta. We won't spend too much time on either. We'll spend an afternoon on Cree. We will do some wonderful snorkeling and then sail through to Mapati and Augusta that we'll both visit on the same morning, the following morning. That's the seahorse anchored off Mapati Island. On Cree, we'll be looking for dusky megapode and a very good chance of Waigeo spotted couscous, which is a type of rare marsupial that occurs on the island. And that's a big snorkeling part of the trip. Heading on to Mapati, we'll then enjoy species like white-bellied seagull, which is quite widespread, but always nice to see. And beachstone curlew, which is a tricky species throughout its range. It does occur right at the east coast of Australia, but never easy to find. We usually find one or two around the edge of the islands. Raja shelducks are pleasantly common and tame around the One Lodge dive resort on Augusta Island. But it's the endemics that we really want to focus on there. And this olive honeyeater is one of those such endemics that occurs on only a handful of islands in the Napier Strait and has been seen by probably fewer than maybe 100 or 200 birders ever. As well as island whistler, the call of the species was only recorded a few years ago, a virtually unknown bird until very recently. Arafura fantail occurs in northern Australia, but is quite easy to see on these small islands. These birds are what we call supertramp species. It was dubbed by an ornithologist years back. I'm not sure where the name derives from, but it basically refers to these tiny island endemics that were basically forced off the larger islands onto the small islands, and where they thrive because of a lack of diversity of other species. Violet neck lorries are another big target there. If split, this is the scaled lorry, and we usually get some nice perch views of them. All right, then leaving the really tiny islands of Mapati and Augusta, we'll then sail southwestwards towards the extremely seldom birded Kofiau in search of two of the world's most localized endemics, the Kofiau Paradise Kingfisher and Kofiau Monarch, two species that until recently were virtually unknown and had almost never been seen. One expedition that went to the islands in the 90s recorded the species, and but that was the first birding trip to ever see these species. We then visited in 2016 and had them both really well and have never missed them since. There's the seahorse anchored off Kofiau. That's the boarding on Kofiau. As mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned it, that almost every boarding that we do and landing is a dry landing. We land on these nice wooden docks, so you don't get your feet wet. The only wet landing of the trip is on Mapati Island, where we just walk around the beach, and you can do that in a pair of flip-flops or thongs or sandals or even barefoot. But almost all the landings on the trip are dry landings on organized, well-structured piers and jetties. All right, then getting stuck into the forest interior, that is the Kofiau Paradise Kingfisher. So similar to the common Paradise Kingfisher, but with this beautiful bright white tail streamer. And Kofiau Monarch, these are two of the only existing photographs of these species. Two birds that have undoubtedly been seen by fewer than 100 birders ever. Leaving Kofiau, we sail through some beautiful uncharted waters across to the island of Obi. That's another really under-visited island just south of Halmahera and harbors a number of really special endemics. On the way there, we'll certainly see large flocks of red-necked phalaropes here and there, basically the stronghold of their wintering grounds. We sometimes see flocks of up to 500, even 1,000 red-necked phalaropes fluttering around at the edge of the boat as we're sailing through. Also, excellent chances for cetaceans on these crossings. A number of whales possible. We'll almost certainly see short-finned pilot whales. These are the fins of short-finned pilot whale. And this is where we've seen Abbott's booby before while crossing towards Obi. And even Beck's petrel is a possibility. And we saw a Beck's petrel on one of our recent trips. And we also treated to some of the most stunning sunsets every evening. Having cocktails and sundowners on the deck while enjoying the last few birds flying around and watching some of the most spectacular sunsets is some of my most amazing memories on any birding tour that I've ever done. But Obi's star endemic is the carunculated fruit dove, one of my favorite birds of the trip. Absolutely spectacular species, and it's separated from the grey-headed fruit dove that occurs on Halmahera by having this bright yellow caruncle patch, little bit of fleshy skin here above the bill. Yeah, again, well represented with doves, like almost all islands on the region. This is the scarlet-breasted fruit dove that's only otherwise shared with Halmahera. And spectacled imperial pigeons are quite common and obtrusive. Cinnamon-bellied imperial pigeons are a lot scarcer, but we always get some nice views of them, another species that's otherwise only shared with Halmahera. But this is one of the core targets, along with carunculated fruit dove, the almost virtually unknown Obi woodcock that we've managed to see on almost all of our trips, and the cinnamon-breasted whistler. Those are the three really core target Obi endemics that we're after during the cruise. That's rufous-bellied triller, another beautiful bird that overlaps with Halmahera, and Obi paradise crow, another bird of paradise, and the last bird of paradise that we're going to see on the trip. So Obi and Halmahera were actually linked to New Guinea very recently in history, and hence them having birds of paradise, despite them being on the western side of Lydekkers Line, which is quite interesting. That's the Malukan flycatcher, or Wallacean flycatcher, or monarch, that's recently split from spectacled monarch further south. And then Malukan flycatcher, another big target, slightly more widespread species through the Malukus, but also only known from the central and southern Malukus. And then a Malukan scopsal with its bright yellow eyes. We'll do some night birding, and at dawn and dusk, listen and watch for Obi woodcock displaying over the forest. And while doing so, we should hear and see Malukan scopsals. Then we leave Obi in the afternoon and sail all afternoon and right through the night to get to Seram, which is a big focal point of the main cruise. We spend 4 nights anchored off Seram, 3 full days to get to grips with Seram's endemics. Seram harbors more endemics of any other island in the region other than New Guinea, both lowland and highland forest specialties that we'll be after during our time there. Seram also still harbors a staggering amount of virgin montane forest that is just an absolute dream to walk through and bird. That's us anchored off the island of Seram, a little village there that we visit. So we take the Zodiacs from here, head on shore to do some birding here. You can see the lowland forest still really well intact and extremely birdy. And then we head up into the highlands on a narrow winding road named the Trans-Seram Highway, but it's not a highway. It's really just a tiny narrow tarmac road or asphalt road that is all weather and easily drivable, but very underutilized and almost makes the perfect birding road, similar to if you bird along the road in Bhutan. Those of you who have visited Bhutan, just really nice and quiet, beautiful forests all around. And there's some scenery of Seram looking down from the island onto the seahorse anchored in the bay there. Almost idyllic scenery throughout the trip. That's up in the highlands of Seram, looking back down onto the bay and into the lowlands. And the Trans-Seram Highway that we bird during our time there. You can just see virgin montane forest all the way through. And one of Seram's really special endemics, and one of my trip favorites, the salmon-crested cockatoo here with its bright pink salmon crest, endemic to Seram, doesn't occur anywhere else on Earth, and we always get to see them really well in the lowlands. Not a great photograph, but a real Seram specialty, the lazuli kingfisher with its brilliant turquoise blue belly. And long-crested myna, another firm favorite on Seram that we encounter in the lowlands. Some of the most exotic endemics anywhere in Indonesia are on Seram. There's a Seram golden bulbul, this bright yellow, almost golden pipit-like tail there. And not much of a looker, but a real specialty, the drab myzomela that is endemic to Seram. This is now getting up into the highlands. We'll be looking for the highland endemics of Seram. Streak-breasted fantails, another highland specialty there. Really inquisitive, obtrusive, and pretty little bird in the understory, along with cinnamon-chested flycatcher that otherwise only overlaps with the island of Buru and one of the Kai Islands further south. Quite a tricky species to catch up with. But if you clued up onto its call, yeah, we usually get some views up in the understory. Up in the canopy, you're looking for Benaya halea, or grey-headed halea, which is actually a type of white-eye, another Seram endemic. And the Seram white-eye as well, a real specialty. This is Serum Imperial Pigeon, another Serum endemic, and one of the most sought after species, unfortunately also by the cage bird trade that is ongoing throughout a lot of Indonesia. These parrots are purple naped lorries, and they are spectacular, they're beautiful, they're musical, so unfortunately they're highly desired for the cage bird trade. But we usually have we always have a couple of sites along the Trans-Seram Highway where we manage to see the species during our time there, but there are really only a few pairs left that are accessible on Seram. One of Seram and Indonesia's rarest and most endangered endemics, the purple-necked lorry. All right, that's Malukan cuckoo. That was virtually unknown until a few years ago, but very gettable these days on Seram. We go at the time of year when they're calling, and we always pick up a calling bird somewhere along the line and manage to get some good scope views. Malukan cuckoo shrike's quite scarce and only occurs in Halmahera, and then down on Seram, strangely missing Obi. Yeah, and that's Turquoise warbling flycatcher, also otherwise only known from Halmahera and Buru. Similar to your bird, it's a flycatcher that occurs through much of the rest of Asia. And one of the rarer endemics, the rufous-necked sparrowhawk. This is an incredibly rare photograph of one perched. You usually just see them flying over the canopy. And we'll also do some night birding on Seram, as is the case on most of the islands, looking for, this is the Seram bubuk, a type of hawk owl that's endemic to the island, recently split from the Hantu bubuk. So Hantu bubuk used to be a species on both Buru and Seram, but completely different vocalizations, different plumage has resulted in them very recently being split up into two separate species. So we now have Seram bubuk on Seram and Buru bubuk on the island of Buru. We'll probably also see Wallace's or Malukan scops owl again, and we'll look for the Malukan mast owl, which is a real specialty too, but really tricky to catch up with. Another species that's virtually was unknown on its wintering grounds was recorded in 2010 from a little sandspit just off Seram. This is the Chinese crested tern. Yeah, you can see it standing out like a sore thumb amongst greater crested terns. It's almost pure white in coloration with this little silvery back. Really stands out like a beacon. Critically endangered species that only breeds in one tiny colony off southeast China. There's only about 60 birds left in the world, one of the world's rarest and most endangered birds. And they then spread out and dispersed to the south of their range and were unknown on their wintering grounds. No one knew where they wintered. And Craig Robson found this bird on the sandspit in 2010. And we were extremely lucky in 2016 to visit the spit and find the species again. And we saw it the year after, and then subsequently again in 2019, we had the bird there. Quite remarkable to see the species so far from its breeding grounds and finally now actually realizing where they overwinter. And that's a closer photograph of Chinese crested tern. Very distinctive species, even in non-breeding plumage. Mammals aren't really a major feature of the trip, but we do see quite a few nice ones during the cruise, and mostly cuscus species, which is a type of marsupial. This is a very distinctive color morph of the northern common cuscus that occurs on Seram. All right, then leaving Seram, we head out a little bit further west across the coast here, sail through the night to get to Buano Island nice and early at dawn to look for a very special species called Buano Monarch. That's us anchored on our zodiacs just off the shore of Buano. Buano is a tiny limestone island, and the Buano Monarch is specific to this island and the limestone forest on the island itself. We'll then head in on a little forest trail and hopefully have some really nice views of the Monarch during our time there. As a little view of the village that we go through, the people are exceedingly friendly, and because they see so few birders and birding groups and Westerners, they're really intrigued by our presence, and especially the children will come up and and they're really friendly, and they'll say hi, and they'll want to look through the binoculars, and we'll hand them the binoculars to have a look, and have them look through the telescopes and show them the birds. It's really nice and interactive with the locals on some of the islands like Buano and Obi. Here's the little trail heading up into the forest that we'll take in search of the Buano monarch, as well as island monarch and Ceram northern fantail. Here's a photograph of Ceram northern fantail that's only known from Buano and Ambon Island, and much scarcer and much trickier to see on Ceram. A lot easier to see on the small islands. From Buano, we then venture around this little bay here and through the channel, ending up in Ambon. We'll have a final evening dinner on the ship, say farewell to our wonderful staff that have been so hospitable to us over the past week and a half, and search for the endemic Ambon white-eye, do a little bit of general birding around there. There's a nice little wetland that we often get to bird. And before saying goodbye to those folks who will be leaving us there at the end of the main tour before continuing on the Buru extension. So heading down onto Buru, we used to take the ferry across, but Indonesian ferries really aren't that great. If you want to try and avoid them, if you can avoid them, you want to try and avoid them. It's great that there's now the domestic airport that connects Ambon and Buru. And so it's from being an overnight ferry trip that really wasn't that unpleasant. It was decent, it was doable, and it got you to Buru, which is great. We now get to fly, so half-an-hour flight, very quick and easy onto Buru, and then a domestic flight back. So yeah, the trip experience has been enhanced even further by the building of the Buru domestic airport. And yeah, as far as endemics are concerned, Buru holds one of the highest number of endemics of any island in Indonesia, and some of the rarest and least known birds that have really only opened up to the birding community in about the last 10 years. There's only one accessible road that heads up into the highlands, and you could only previously reach an altitude of around 800 meters, which meant that a lot of the really high altitude Buru endemics were completely inaccessible until very recently, when that logging road was made a bit higher up, and we can now access around 1,300 meters in elevation, so around 5,000 feet. And that gives us access to all of the Buru endemics, even things like Madanga, blue-fronted lorikeet, and black lord parrot that were virtually unknown mythical birds until very recently, that are now firmly on the cards. It's incredible. You can now see every single Buru endemic during a visit to Buru. This is one of the island's scarcest species. It's a lowland species called Buru green pigeon. This is the Buru monarch that's endemic to Buru too, that we'll get in the lowlands. Very similar looking to the Buano monarch from Buano. Buru golden greenbill, similar to the Ceram golden greenbill, but much more olive in color. And flame-breasted or Buru flowerpecker, a recent split from ashy flowerpecker that's pleasantly common in the highlands. That's typical birding on Buru. That's down the logging track. It's a rough 4x4 track, but we're well equipped with 4x4 vehicles to access this beautiful habitat. And as on almost all of these Indonesian islands, you're accessing near virgin montane forest and birding in a beautiful climate, very temperate. You can virtually bird all day because it's so nice and cool. On Buru, we obviously leave the ship and we stay in really comfortable accommodation right at the edge of the coast, and we get a cooking crew to come in and cater for us there that do a really good job. The rooms are actually exceedingly comfortable, air conditioned, very spacious, and makes the perfect base on Buru for our I think it's a 4 or 5 night stay on Buru. This is the Buru white-eye, pleasantly common in the highlands too, and pale cicada bird that also overlaps with Ceram and Obi. And white-bibbed fruit dove, a stunning small island fruit dove endemic. It's likely to be split as small island fruit dove in future from the mainland New Guinea subspecies. And that's white-naped monarch that has a strange disjunct population, one on Buru and then one on Halmahera, a really flashy species that's quite vocal and exceedingly cooperative and and obtrusive as it comes into playback of its call. And this one's quite excited and came in really nice and close for good photo ops. That's just some of the stunning forest that we get to bird in on Buru. This is up in the highlands. Of all the Buru endemics, of which there are about 30, and I've just gone through a few here. I'd love to carry on all night, but yeah, I'm unfortunately restricted with time in this talk, so I have to keep it reasonably short. But yeah, of all the Buru endemics, of which there are so many and so many absolute stunners, probably the most special of all is the virtually mythical Madanga, a very strange species that occurs right up in the highlands in tiny, what they call elfin forest. It's this mossy, coniferous, mixed broadleaf forest up in the hills. And we'll take a trail to get up there. This is the Madanga Trail that we hike up to try and see the Madanga. And this is the Madanga, that awfully mythical species endemic to Buru that was virtually unknown until a few years ago. Quite amazingly, it was discovered as early as the 18th century by Dutch explorers, but remained unknown and unseen for almost 2 centuries before being seen again in the early 90s. And then it remained unseen for almost a century until birding groups found it only about 10 years ago up on this forest trail. We were the second birding group to ever see Madanga in the wild. And we saw it 2 years in a row in 2016 and 2017, but sadly haven't managed to find it again since. They're certainly still up there, but as with any rare and low density and virtually unknown species, you've got to be lucky to see them. And who knows, maybe next year's going to be another Madanga year where we get to finally get Madanga on the list once again as before. It's such a strange bird. It was placed with the white eyes for many years. You can see it looks quite like a white eye structure, but it's actually apparently really closely related to pipits, especially the olive-back pipit. They occur in pairs and mixed species flocks up in this elfin forest and walk almost like pipits along mossy branches, not atypical to a tree creeper or a nuthatch. Really bizarre, really strange bird, and yeah, certainly one of Buru's holy grail species that we'll be searching for on the Buru extension. Well, thanks again, folks, for joining me this evening on my West Papuan Islands cruise talk. I thoroughly enjoyed sharing my experiences and the cruise with you, and I hope it was an informative, educational and fun presentation. And yeah, I look forward to seeing a good number of you on this trip in future. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Nikki. Over to you, Nikki.
Oh, thank you so much, Glenn. I've got so many questions for you. So let's see, and I know we're out of time, but there's some great questions. A really remarkable place. And so the first one here is I'm a keen birder, but also enjoy snorkeling and or scuba diving. Are there any opportunities for snorkeling or scuba diving on the trip? Would there be any time for this kind of for this activity off any of the islands? So yeah, basically,
yeah, very good question,
snorkel?
and it's a big feature of the trip. And we set aside 3 solid sessions dedicated to snorkeling, of which they vary in length between about an hour to even around 3 hours. So those 3 snorkeling sessions are off the island of Cree towards the beginning of the trip. We snorkel a beautiful, clear, calm coral reef there. We then have another snorkeling opportunity off the island of Mapati in Augusta, and then another snorkeling opportunity a little bit later in the trip. So yeah, 3 scheduled, organized snorkeling opportunities during the trip. To boot, when we anchored off the various islands, although we're not necessarily off actual reefs where there are loads of fishes, anyone is welcome to jump off the back of the ship with snorkeling gear and snorkel around, and maybe you might just find a black-tip reef shark or a turtle or something different. So lots of swimming opportunities and 3 scheduled snorkeling opportunities.
That is very impressive. Another one here is, my sea legs are not great, but the birds and the cruise itself looks so incredible. What are the sea conditions like given its tropical zone? Another one is, how stable is the ship? Is motion sickness an issue? Suggestions for those who suffer from seasickness.
So from past experience, I think we've done the trip 5 times now. I've led 3 of those. We have very few people ever succumb to motion sickness. We found that the ship is remarkably stable for its size. And fortunately, the waters that we sail through are almost always extremely calm and quiet, especially during the time of year that we've picked to do the trip. It's a big reason why we do the trip. Combined with displaying birds of paradise and the best time of birding and weather and all that kind of thing, the sea conditions are really very good, usually between about October and December. Calm seas for 99% of the time. The only time I've ever had reasonably rough seas, we encountered a storm, which could happen pretty much anywhere, anytime. It wasn't a major storm and it wasn't anything scary, but the seas got a little bit choppy and a bit of a swell, and that was between Seram and Buano. Keith was actually on the trip, and yeah, he can
Yep.
probably testify to the fact that conditions were a little bit rough that night, but otherwise, yeah, almost always really calm, really smooth conditions. If you do succumb to seasickness, yeah, you should probably take something, maybe the first few days of the trips just to get your sea legs. But most of the guests that have done the trip have not taken anything, and yeah, other than 1 or 2 guests that one night getting a little bit seasick, no one seems to ever get seasick on the trip.
Do you, and I see I've got 2 questions that are the same. Do you pick up any seabirds when crossing the islands, and what seabirds might we see?
We do. We see quite a few seabirds crossing the islands. Because it's tropical waters, the density and diversity of seabirds is not very great, but there are quite a few interesting species out there. Majority are tern species, so we always see a lot of different species of tern: common tern, roseate tern, black nape, black and common noddies. There's even a chance of Aleutian tern wintering there, and but yeah, we almost always see bulbous petrel somewhere along the line. And a few trips ago, we saw Beck's petrel, red-footed and Abbott's boobies sometimes show up. Wedge-tailed and streaked shearwaters are usually present too, and we see those. With chance of Matsudaira's storm petrel, although we haven't recorded it yet. And yeah, we usually see 1 or 2 of the skuas or Jaegers wintering there, like Pomerine or parasitic Jaeger. Lesser frigate birds, greater frigate bird. So quite a few species, but nothing like your cold waters of New Zealand or South Africa or Chile, as far as numbers and diversity is concerned.
Then, have you ever had any security issues while start traveling?
None whatsoever. No, it's probably one of the most safe places on earth. Honestly, New Guinea Indonesia as a country is one of the safest countries. And this specific part of New Guinea is exceedingly safe. I've never even felt remotely unsafe in any respect. We've never even had a tiny petty theft on the trip. We start on the island of New Guinea, which has a bit of a reputation, but the Indonesian side of New Guinea, especially the lowlands, is extremely safe. Now, especially that Sarong area. No security issues whatsoever on this trip.
Any leeches that you might encounter? Yes. Is it on shore?
We do encounter leeches, especially in the lowlands of New Guinea. Leech socks work really well. If you don't have leech socks or have never worn them before, we will offer them on the trip itself. I can bring a couple of sets with. And it's just something that you slip over your socks, then over your trousers, and then tuck into your shoes. They're comfortable. They basically leech proof. And the combination of wearing long pants, tuck your shirt in, spray a bit of insect repellent around your ankles and waist, wear leech socks, and you should not get any leech bites. And although there are leeches in the lowlands of New Guinea, we don't ever encounter that many. It's never usually a big issue. They're there, but they're not off-putting.
What bird guide is appropriate for this kind of trip?
So there's 3 excellent bird guides that are absolutely, there's 2 that are absolutely essential, and because it covers such a vast area and an area that's covered by 2 different field guides, there are 2 guides that you have to have. So it's the Birds of the Indonesian Archipelago by Eaton, a very recently produced book that covers all those remote islands that we were talking about that we covered during the trip, but that doesn't cover mainland New Guinea. So for the first part of the trip, the first about 5 or 6 days, you'll need a different field guide. Any of the 2 New Guinea field guides, either the new Beeler and Pratt guide, which is excellent, or the other field guide by, I'm trying to think of his name. There's two field guides to New Guinea, and they're both equally excellent. I find it hard to choose between the 2, but either of those 2, plus the Indonesian Archipelago field guide, will have you in good stead for the whole trip.
Snakes? Snakes be something we should be concerned about?
No, not at all. Not at that time of year in that area. I don't recall seeing a single snake on any of the trips that I've done. No, snakes are not an issue at all. When we head into the forest interior for a couple of the birds of paradise on mainland New Guinea, there's a remote chance of encountering a snake, but because we're in a group and snakes are usually quite scared of people, they'll probably disappear before you even know that it's there. I haven't encountered any snakes during the trip.
And how does the trip differ from Banda Sea?
It's quite a similar trip in the style in which it's done, but as far as the species are concerned, completely different in every respect. So a completely different suite of endemics, very little overlap between the Malukus, the central and northern Malukus, and the southern Malukus. So both trips have a staggering number of endemics with very little overlap. Also, the Banda Sea doesn't do any New Guinea, so none of the New Guinea species on the Banda Sea cruise. If you're a very keen birder and you want to do several trips to Indonesia, you really do want to do both trips.
And then I have, let's see, sure, I think we're running out of time. So I'm just going to have 2 more questions, and then we'll end. If there's any questions that we have missed, we'll endeavor to get a hold of you after this. The first one is, are there single cabins available when they book this tour?
There are, but because of the nature of the trip in that it's a cruise, and it's already quite a pricey trip. It's limited in space. If you do wish to have single accommodation, as far as I'm aware, the single supplement is basically the price of 2 places on the trip. So it's almost double the price for single accommodation. It is possible, but it then becomes very pricey.
Yeah, that's correct.
And the very last one is, what are the main conservation issues facing the region, and how does Rockjumper address them?
And sorry, the last finish off that question, Nikki, and how?
Yes, so what are the main conservation issues facing the region, and how does Rockjumper address them?
Okay, so the main conservation issues is bird trapping and forest degradation. Forest degradation is not a major issue in the regions that we visit, the islands. It seems to be more a lowland phenomenon, as is often the case with places throughout the world. But not a major issue, and it doesn't seem to affect the birds in the lowlands. In fact, a lot of species actually occur at higher densities in the secondary, slightly degraded forest. What they do in New Guinea, as they do in Central and West Africa, is they take out a few trees here and there and plant cross. So you get this sort of what you call farm bush type habitat that's actually really birdy and really productive for all the lowland species. The highland forests are almost virgin and untouched, so that's not an issue there. Bird trapping is unfortunately an ongoing issue throughout Indonesia and most of Asia these days. for the cage bird trade. How we combat that, I don't think we could do any better than trying to engage the local people to help us on our birding tours. So we hire local guides, we use the local guides. By doing that, what you're helping someone who might have been a trapper or who might trap if he wasn't a bird guide. You've now got these guides working for you. They've got their children looking at birds because they want to get them into the birding guiding scenario. That directly affects and their families positively with the income. So yeah, just by hiring local guides, using the locals, and trying to, everyone we teach or everyone we meet during the trip, just trying to educate them and show them that we bring an awful lot of money and and knowledge to the region on a birding trip to look at birds, not to trap birds. So there's way more money to be made and a way better livelihood to be made if you become a bird guide or a conservationist than there is by just randomly trapping a bird and then it's gone, and in a few years there's nothing left. So just we constantly trying to educate the local people throughout Asia and Indonesia about the negative effects of trapping and utilizing local guides and anyone who's interested in birds to help us find some of the rare and special species.
Oh, Glenn, thank you so much. And to everyone from our Facebook Live and on our webinar, really, it was really great to connect with you, and it was really lovely to listen to you, Glenn. Next week, we venture to the vast plains of the Serengeti and nearby Ngorongoro crater. These are arguably two of the most iconic names in the natural world, and this is, after all, where the legendary wildebeest migration takes place. Africa's most famous animals still reside in magnificent numbers, and the bird life is prolific. So join Rockjumpers founder Adam Riley as he takes us on a classic virtual safari through these two mind-blowing locations in northern Tanzania. If you have been before, it's likely next week's webinar will be a nostalgic journey down memory lane. While for those who have yet to experience the sheer marvel of this ecosystem, it promises to be a spellbinding presentation that will likely launch the Serengeti and Ngorongoro to the top of your bucket list. Prepare for truly mouth-watering photographs and hear all about this wonderful part of the world from Adam himself. Also a reminder that our webinars are recorded and can be viewed later. The links will be available within the next 48 hours. These webinars are being offered free of charge, but should you wish to donate towards our tour leaders, our GoFundMe link is still open and 100% of the proceeds go directly to our guides. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, Wednesday at the same time. So from all of us at Team Rockjumper, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.